"You don't belong here anymore." That's what my grandson said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough for the words to stick in the air like frost. His sister laughed, a sharp little giggle, and held the front door open wider. Behind them, the Christmas tree glowed in the window, red and gold lights, gifts piled high. All the warmth of family wrapped up in one picture, and I was standing on the porch, hat in my hand, shivering. I'm Thomas Miller, 68, widower, grandfather to 3 children, who used to sit on my knee and beg me for candy canes at this very house. I built this place board by board when I came back from the service. Every nail, every brick, mine. My wife and I made Christmas here every year until tonight. The snow crunched under my boots as I shifted my weight. It was bitter cold, the kind of cold that bites through your coat and reminds you you're not as young as you once were. My breath rose in faint clouds. Behind me, the street was quiet, just a lamppost flickering and the faint sound of some neighbors' carolers practicing too late. Inside, I could see shadows move, laughter, a clink of glasses. A fire popped in the hearth. My hearth. I caught a glimpse of my youngest granddaughter twirling in a new red dress. She didn't look my way. Nobody did. "Grandpa, just go," my oldest grandson muttered, the words dropping like stones. "We don't need you hanging around like some old ghost," he smirked, my own blood tossing me out like last week's trash. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I held the doorknob for a second, feeling the warmth leak from inside, then let it go. The door shut in my face with a dull finality. A lock clicked. They went back to their party. I stood there a while, snowflakes landing on my coat, melting into small dark spots, my hands stiff, my throat dry. The glow of the tree still visible through the curtains, mocking me with its promise of comfort I was no longer allowed. And I remembered. I remembered Christmas mornings when I strung those same lights across the roof in the freezing wind, just so their little eyes would light up. I remembered hauling in the tree from the lot, needles scratching my arms, because my wife wanted it tall enough to touch the ceiling. I remembered putting toy trains together until my fingers cramped so my grandkids could tear through wrapping paper and squeal with joy. Funny thing, none of those memories made me smile now. They cut. Sharp. I walked down the porch steps, each one groaning under my weight like it resented me too. Out on the sidewalk, the air smelled of chimney smoke and cinnamon. Somewhere down the block, a child's laughter rang out. Not mine, not tonight. That's when something inside me shifted. I wasn't just cold anymore. I was awake. You don't belong here anymore. The words rang in my ears, over and over, like a drum beat. I reached the corner and turned back once. Their windows glowed warm against the night, a picture of family togetherness. But if you looked closer, you'd see the cracks. Greedy kids, lazy kids, kids who thought Christmas meant free gifts, not sacrifice. Kids who thought the man who raised them could be erased with one shove out the door. They thought wrong. I went home, to the small rented room I kept after signing the deed to them last year. A gesture they promised was about keeping the house in the family. They had begged, cried, said they wanted me close forever. I believed them. Fool. The wallpaper in my room peeled at the corners. The radiator rattled more than it worked. But the quiet was good. Quiet let me think. I boiled water for tea. Steam rose, clouding my glasses. I sat at the rickety table, tea cooling in front of me, and let my mind wander. That night, I pulled out an old box from under the bed. Military papers. Bank statements. A copy of the deed. Their names on it. My signature at the bottom. I stared at it a long time, fingers tracing the ink. They thought they had won, that they had pushed me aside, but they hadn't noticed what I kept tucked away, what I never told them. The room was dim. Only the weak glow of a lamp lit the papers. Shadows stretched across the floor. I leaned back in my chair and let out a dry laugh. They kicked me out on Christmas Day, and I already knew how I'd answer. Not with shouting, not with fists. No. Something colder, cleaner. I folded the deed back into the envelope, tucked the papers away, poured the tea down the sink. My hand didn't shake, my heart didn't race. They thought Christmas had ended with me on the porch, but for them, it was only the beginning. The next morning, the snow on the porch had melted into a dirty crust. I walked by just to see. The gift boxes still sat stacked by the tree, bows crooked from eager hands. I could hear music inside, tinny and too loud. Bing Crosby, of all things. They never cared for those old songs, but now they played them like tradition was theirs to claim. I stood at the edge of the yard. No one noticed me. Not one of my grandchildren came to the window. The curtains stayed drawn. That house, my house, stood there like it had forgotten me overnight. I walked on, past the corner store where the bell above the door rang hollow, past the church where the nativity still leaned sideways from last night's wind. The cold bit into my ears. My bones ached. I thought about how quickly family could turn you from center to stranger. By noon, I sat in the diner on Main Street. The place smelled of burnt coffee and grease, just the way it always had. I ordered nothing but black coffee and a slice of pie. The waitress didn't ask questions. She slid the plate across with a pitying smile I pretended not to see. Halfway through the pie, I heard them, my grandchildren, 2 of them, the boys. Their voices carried from a booth across the room. I didn't turn, but I listened. "Did you see his face when we told him to leave?" the older one said. He laughed, fork clinking against the plate. "Yeah, he looked like he might cry." The younger chuckled. I almost felt bad. Almost. Another laugh. My fork froze. The pie tasted like ash. They didn't see me sitting there. Didn't think I'd be close enough to hear. They talked like I was a character in a story they'd already closed the book on. A punchline. One of them lowered his voice, but I still caught it. "He doesn't even know half the stuff we've done with the money already. New TV, games, that trip to Miami." I set the fork down. My hands didn't shake. They should have, but they didn't. They were spending it. My pension, the savings I'd poured into that house, the equity they begged me to sign over. They weren't protecting anything. They were bleeding it dry. When they finally left the diner, stomping snow off their shoes and laughing, I stayed seated. I asked for another cup of coffee. The steam rose in little curls, fogging my glasses, hiding my eyes. That was the moment doubt became something sharper. It wasn't just cruelty on Christmas. It wasn't just disrespect. They were parasites, and parasites didn't stop until you cut them off. That evening, I went back to my small room. The radiator hissed. A draft slid under the window. I pulled out the box again and opened the envelope, the deed, the title, and another paper tucked behind them. A copy of the trust documents my lawyer had suggested years ago. Back then, I'd said no. I thought family could be trusted. I turned the paper over in my hand. My reflection showed faintly in the glass of the picture frame on the table. My wife smiling beside me from years ago. She'd warned me. "Don't give it all away, Tom," she'd said. "Kids change when money's involved." She was right. I lit a single lamp. The shadows stretched long across the wall, reaching toward the box like dark fingers. My heart beat steady, not fast, cold, not hot. I took out a notebook, not for journaling, for keeping score. Every insult, every stolen dollar, every laugh at my expense, a ledger of betrayal. First line, Christmas Day, kicked out. Second line, diner, mockery, spending. I closed the notebook. The sound was final, like a door slamming. Later that week, I stopped by the post office, bought a new lockbox key. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed it over. I smiled, a tight smile, the kind that says more than words. At home, I packed the papers into a folder, slipped them into the lockbox, and set it aside. Safe. Out of reach. Mine. The grandchildren thought they'd already won. Thought I was an old man with nothing left but stories and aches. They had no idea I was writing something new, something they'd never seen coming. I looked out the window that night. Snow was falling again, soft and quiet, layering the street in white. The lamppost flickered. Somewhere, a dog barked. I whispered to the empty room, "You think I'll freeze. You think I'll vanish. But I'm just waiting." And waiting is something I've always been good at. The week after Christmas, their house blazed with lights like nothing had happened. Strings of red and gold still looped across the porch. Icicle bulbs still dripping from the gutters. They hadn't even bothered to take them down. Too busy spending. Too sure I was out of the picture. I didn't knock. I didn't want their pitying smirks or their forced, "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" I walked 2 blocks down instead, boots crunching in the hard snow, until the glow of the public library appeared. The place smelled like old carpet and radiator dust, but it was warm. Inside, I sat down at one of the computers. The keys clattered under my fingers. Slow, steady. My grandchildren never thought I could manage technology. They liked to joke about me not knowing how to stream or swipe, but they forgot I'd run payroll for a dozen men on base with nothing but a calculator and a steady hand. Numbers I understood. Always had. I logged into my bank account. The screen glowed blue against my glasses, and there it was. Withdrawals, charges, transfers. Electronic stores, alcohol, a trip booking site. They weren't protecting what I gave them. They were draining it dry. I should have been furious. But instead, I smiled. A dry, crooked smile that tasted of iron. Parasites don't stop feeding until you cut them off. I clicked through the menus slowly, like lining up sights on a rifle. Then I picked up the phone. The bank clerk's voice was young, polite, rehearsed. He probably pictured an old man confused about online banking. He had no idea. "Yes, this is Thomas Miller," I said. "I want to freeze all secondary cards. Immediately. Issue replacements in my name only." "Sir, that would cancel." "Do it," I cut in. "Every charge from today forward. Declined." The keyboard clicks on his end sounded like the tick of a countdown. "All right, Mr. Miller. That will remove any authorized users. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I let silence hang before answering. More sure than I've ever been. By the time I left the library, snow was falling again. Fat, heavy flakes drifting slow, muffling the town in white. I pulled my collar up against the cold. Somewhere nearby, a car engine revved. Somewhere else, a child laughed. The world moved on. But I knew what was coming. A storm inside that house. And I didn't have to wait long. That night, I passed by their windows. I wasn't spying, not exactly. Just walking slow enough to hear. The lights were still on. The tree still glowed. But inside, voices rose sharp. "What do you mean declined?" one grandson shouted. "I tried 3 different stores," another barked. "Every card, same thing." Someone slammed a door. A chair scraped. Then silence. I kept walking, steam rising from a street vent beside me, fogging my glasses. I didn't look back, but I could picture them, scrambling, confused, their smug little world cracking open. The next morning, a knock rattled my thin apartment door. I didn't hurry. When I opened it, my oldest grandson stood there, red-faced from wind and fury. "You cut us off," he snapped. "We can't even buy groceries." I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. Sounds like a problem grown men usually solve by working. His mouth fell open. He'd never heard me speak to him that way. To him, I'd always been the quiet shadow at Christmas dinners, the one who carved the turkey and stayed out of the way. "You can't do this," he hissed. "The house is ours now." I let the words hang before answering. "No, the debt is yours. The house still answers to me. Read the deed." His eyes flickered just for a second. Doubt. He hadn't read anything. He'd taken my signature for a surrender. "You're just bitter," he spat, but his voice cracked. Then he leaned down, close. "Don't push this, Grandpa. You won't like where it goes." I held his stare, unmoving. "Neither will you." He cursed, spit on the frozen step, and stormed off. The spit froze before it spread. Just like him, weak, shallow, nothing that lasted. That night, I lit the small lamp in my rented room. Shadows stretched long across the peeling wallpaper. I poured tea, let the steam curl up, blurring my reflection in the window. Then I opened the notebook I had started. Line 1, Christmas Day, kicked out. Line 2, diner, mockery. Line 3, cards frozen, first strike. I underlined those last 2 words, first strike. I sat back, pen still in hand. The radiator clanked. The building groaned with the weight of winter. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Calm. Cold. They thought I was finished. They thought I'd freeze quietly while they lived warm in my house. But tonight, they felt the first cut. And soon, they'd realize what I'd always known. I wasn't the one trespassing. I was the foundation under their feet. And when a foundation shifts, the whole house comes down. The following week, the shouting from the house died down. The lights were finally taken off the porch, the tree dragged to the curb like a carcass. I watched from across the street as my grandsons bickered over who had to carry it. They looked smaller with the glow gone, dim, ordinary. I thought maybe they'd come storming back, that they'd bang on my door again, demand I hand over cards, accounts, whatever scraps they thought were theirs, but they didn't. For days there was nothing, no calls, no knocks, no footsteps on my stairwell, just silence, almost too much silence. At first I wondered if they'd figured something out, found another way to bleed me dry. Maybe they'd gone quiet because they were scheming, but then I heard something different. Laughter. On Friday night, I walked by on my way back from the diner. Their windows glowed again. Shadows danced on the curtains. Music pulsed faintly through the glass. A party. They were throwing another party. I stopped at the edge of the yard. The snow under my boots crunched loud in the still night. I could smell grilled meat, cigarette smoke drifting out the open kitchen window. Their laughter rang out, sharp, cocky. They weren't worried anymore. Inside, one of my grandsons raised a bottle. "To us!" he shouted. The others cheered. I caught a glimpse of my granddaughter in a glittering top. Her phone raised, snapping photos, posting proof to the world that life was good, that Grandpa's little stunt hadn't slowed them down. I turned away before they saw me, walked back into the cold. My breath rose in front of me, steady as smoke. Back in my room, I sat at the small table with the notebook open. The lamp buzzed faintly overhead. I stared at the last line I'd written. First strike. Now they thought it was the last. They thought I had shot my one arrow, that I'd retreat into silence again, too old, too tired, too bitter to keep going. They thought wrong. I closed the notebook. Not tonight, not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch. The next morning, I walked to the bank. Not the small branch on Main Street where everyone knew my name. A bigger one, downtown. Glass walls, polished floors, strangers behind the counters, the kind of place my grandchildren wouldn't think to watch. I asked for an account manager. A woman in a navy blazer led me into a room with a glass table and cold air that smelled faintly of printer ink. She smiled politely. "What can we do for you today, Mr. Miller?" I slid the envelope across the table. "I want to talk about the deed and the trust I never finished setting up." Her smile faltered. She glanced at the papers, then at me. "Are you looking to transfer ownership?" I shook my head. "I'm looking to protect it, for my own family." Her pen paused over the notepad. That was the first time I said it aloud, and hearing the words gave me a kind of grim satisfaction. We spent the next hour going over options, a trust, a will revision, steps that couldn't be undone with crocodile tears or forged signatures. She explained each in her cool, careful voice, and I nodded along. My mind didn't drift once. By the time I left, the paperwork was in motion, slow, deliberate, invisible. My grandchildren would never see it coming until the ground was gone from under their feet. That night, I made soup on the little stove in my room. Steam rose from the pot, fogging the small window. I ate slowly, each spoonful steady. Not hunger, not satisfaction, just patience. Across town, they were still celebrating, posting photos, pretending the freeze had been a mistake, a glitch, a hiccup. Let them think it. Let them breathe easy for now, because the best way to crush arrogance is to let it grow first. I wiped the bowl clean, set it aside, and leaned back in my chair. The radiator rattled. The notebook sat closed beside me. For now, it could stay that way. They thought Grandpa Tom had given up, and I was content to let them believe it. The silence didn't last forever. It never does. 2 weeks after Christmas, the knock came. Not furious this time. Polite, almost careful. I opened the door to find my granddaughter, scarf wound tight around her neck, a little smile pasted on like cheap wallpaper. "Grandpa," she said softly, "can we talk?" She looked different from the last time I saw her, less glitter, more nerves. Still, her eyes darted past me into the small room. She took in the peeling paint, the single chair, the lamp with its crooked shade. I saw the thought flicker across her face. He really has nothing. "What is it?" I asked. My voice was flat. She stepped inside, uninvited, sat at the edge of the bed. "We were harsh at Christmas. The boys went too far. We don't want things to be ugly." Ugly. That was the word she chose. Not cruel, not unforgivable, just ugly. I folded my arms. "Then why do you look like you're here on assignment?" Her cheeks flushed. She fiddled with her phone. "Grandpa, the bills are piling up. Heating, electric. We can't keep the house warm. You know the system. You know how complicated it all is." There it was. Not apology, not reconciliation. Just need. I let her talk. She spun a story about family unity, about second chances, about how we should work together again. I almost laughed. She thought she was negotiating. When she finished, I leaned closer. "Do you know what your brother said in the diner? Do you know what he bragged about?" Her face froze. She didn't know. Or maybe she did, but hoped I hadn't heard. I stood slowly. The radiator hissed behind me like a warning. "You all think this is about bills, about groceries, about comfort. It's not. It's about respect, and you burn that to the ground." She shifted uncomfortably, stood, and smoothed her coat. "If that's how you want it, Grandpa, just remember we tried." She left without looking back. The hallway swallowed her footsteps. I sat down and opened the notebook. Line 4. The performance begins. Because I knew this wasn't the end. It was the start of a campaign. One by one, they would try. Guilt, charm, manipulation. But none of it would matter. The next morning, I got my confirmation. An envelope slid under my door. Inside, a typed letter with shaky attempts at warmth. "Dear Dad, we want to make peace. Please consider moving back in. Family is stronger together." I read it twice, then held it up to the window. The signature wasn't even theirs. It was printed, a copy, not written from the heart, spat out from a computer like an invoice. I slipped it into the notebook without comment. That evening, I walked by the house again. The windows glowed, but dimmer this time. No parties now, no loud music. Just the quiet drone of a television. The yard was unshoveled, snow piled heavy on the walk. The house looked tired already, and still they didn't know. Didn't know that the trust papers were filed. Didn't know that the bank had already flagged their accounts. Didn't know that the ground under them was shifting grain by grain. I stopped at the edge of the yard. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The wind cut sharp across my face. I could have knocked. Could have stood in the doorway like a ghost come home. But ghosts don't knock. They wait. They haunt. They let the living destroy themselves. I walked on. Back in my room, I set the notebook on the table and poured myself another cup of tea. Steam curled, ghost-like, into the lamp's weak light. I whispered to the empty room, "They think they're rebuilding. They're not. They're rotting from the inside." I closed the notebook, leaned back, and let the radiator's hiss fill the silence. They thought Grandpa Tom was fading, but I was patient, and patience is sharper than anger. February came cold and cruel. Ice clung to the gutters, sidewalks split with frost, the kind of weather that makes every sound sharper. Even the crows sounded brittle. I walked by the house one morning. Their house, they thought. My house, I knew. The driveway hadn't been shoveled. A past due notice stuck crooked in the mailbox, red letters bleeding through the envelope. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. Through the kitchen window, I caught sight of my grandson pacing with a phone to his ear, his shoulders slumped, head in his hands. His brother sat at the table, flipping a bill over and over, like the numbers might change if he turned it fast enough. My granddaughter scrolled her phone, face pale. No glitter, no laughter, no smug little smirks. The silence of a house unraveling. I kept walking, cane tapping against the frozen sidewalk. A neighbor out front scraping ice off his windshield gave me another of those quiet nods. He knew. They all knew. That afternoon, I went back downtown. This time, not to the bank, not the county office, to the courthouse. A low brick building with iron doors and heat that clung like damp cloth. I carried a folder under my arm, my notebook. Copies of statements, records, proof. The clerk at the counter raised her brows when she saw my age. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I'd like to file notice, eviction, for unauthorized occupants." Her eyes flickered, surprise quickly smoothed into neutrality. She handed me forms. I sat at a table under buzzing lights and began filling them out with a steady hand. Each line was a nail, each signature a hammer strike. When I finished, the clerk stamped them. The sound was final, loud, like a gunshot in the quiet hall. Walking home, the air bit at my lungs. But I felt lighter than I had in years, because this time, the words weren't just in my notebook. They were in the system. 3 days later, the letter arrived. I didn't have to deliver it. The sheriff's office did. I happened to be walking by when they came. A deputy in a thick jacket knocked on the door. My granddaughter answered, smile bright, pretending nothing was wrong. The deputy's voice carried across the yard. Notice to vacate. 30 days. The smile cracked. Her face went pale as paper. I didn't stop walking, just kept going, scarf pulled tight, breath rising in clouds. But I heard the shouts behind me, chairs scraping, doors slamming, panic. That night, I sat in my room. The radiator hissed. I set the notice copy on the table and traced the stamp with my finger. I didn't laugh, didn't cry, just sat in the quiet and let the weight of it sink in. The next day they came to me, all three. They didn't bother knocking this time. They burst in, red-faced, shouting. My oldest grandson slammed his fist on the table so hard the lamp shook. You're throwing us out? Out of our house? I looked at him, cold. My house. Always was, always will be. The younger one leaned forward, spit flying. You can't do this. People will talk. Everyone will know you ruined your own family. I leaned back, folded my hands. They already know who ruined who. Ask your neighbors. That landed. They flinched. They knew the stares they'd been getting, the whispers when they walked to the store. My granddaughter's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was sharp. You're destroying us, Grandpa. For what? Because we made a mistake? I stood slowly, cane pressing into the floorboards. My shadow stretched long in the lamplight. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And now, you'll live with it. They shouted more, threats and pleas tangled together. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Eventually, they stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. When the silence returned, I wrote in the notebook, February 18th. They finally know the floor is gone. That night, I dreamed of my wife. She was in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, humming the way she always did when she baked bread. She looked at me once, smiled, and said, They never deserved the house, Tom. You built it. You finish it. I woke before dawn, the dream still burning behind my eyes. I boiled water for tea, steam curling against the frosted window, and whispered into the empty room, one more step. The next morning, I walked past the house again. The curtains were shut tight, but I could hear raised voices even through the glass. Panic had a sound, and it carried. The neighbors noticed too. One across the street shook his head as I passed. Another muttered, About time. And still, my grandchildren hadn't learned. That evening, I received a message slipped under my door. A note scrawled in angry handwriting. If you throw us out, we'll ruin you. Don't think you're untouchable. I folded it carefully, slid it into the notebook, and wrote my next line. Threats confirm fear. Fear confirms victory. The lamp flickered once, and the radiator hissed louder. Outside, the wind howled against the thin window panes. I sat there, quiet, steady, as the storm rattled the glass. They thought they could still fight me. They thought threats might scare me back into silence. But the truth was simpler. They weren't fighting me anymore. They were fighting gravity. And gravity always wins. March thaw came slow. Snowmelt dripped from gutters in hesitant drops. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke from dying woodpiles. Change was coming, even if my grandchildren didn't believe it yet. The eviction clock ticked louder with each day. I saw it in the way they carried themselves, shoulders hunched, faces pinched, eyes darting. They stopped inviting friends over. The curtains stayed drawn. They whispered instead of laughed. One night, as I passed the yard, I heard my granddaughter through the open window. We can't stay, not without him. Her voice cracked. One of the boys snapped back, He can't keep this up forever. He's old. He'll break first. I smiled to myself. They still didn't understand. Patience isn't weakness. Patience is a weapon. The final papers arrived on a gray morning, a plain envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside, confirmation of the trust. Every brick, every nail of that house now locked beyond their reach. When I died, it wouldn't pass to them. It would be sold, the proceeds given to causes I chose. My hand didn't shake as I read it. My wife's photo sat on the table beside me, her smile steady. "You finished it," I whispered to her. Steam curled from my teacup, rising like a blessing. That evening, they came again. No shouting this time, no threats. Just 3 pale faces at my door. "Grandpa, please," my granddaughter said, eyes wet. "We'll change. We'll do better. Don't let them take the house." The oldest boy added quickly, "It's not too late. We can fix this. Just tell them you made a mistake." The youngest hung back, jaw tight, but even he couldn't meet my eyes. I looked at them for a long moment, saw the fear, the desperation, saw the children they once were flicker for half a heartbeat, then vanish under years of arrogance. "You made your choices," I said finally. "You made them loud, on Christmas. Do you remember?" Their silence was answer enough. I closed the door slowly. Not a slam, just a quiet end. Their muffled voices lingered outside for a minute, then faded into the night. 3 days later, the sheriff arrived with 2 deputies. The neighbors gathered on porches, arms folded, eyes sharp. Snowmelt puddled in the street as boxes were carried out. Clothes, electronics, furniture I once bought. My grandchildren stood on the lawn, shouting, crying, begging. I didn't watch from my window. I walked right up the street, cane tapping steady until I stood across from them. "Grandpa," my granddaughter sobbed, "please!" The oldest screamed, "You're destroying us!" I looked at them with all the coldness they had earned. "No, you destroyed yourselves. I just stopped pretending otherwise." A hush fell over the crowd. Neighbors stared, some nodded, some whispered. And my grandchildren, 3 broken silhouettes in the melting snow, finally saw what losing everything looked like. By dusk, the house was empty. Deputies locked the door. The lights inside went dark. I walked up the steps slowly, cane steady on the porch boards I had nailed down 40 years ago. The key turned smooth in the lock. The door opened. My house, quiet at last. Inside, the air smelled of dust and stale smoke. Curtains crooked, carpet stained. They hadn't cared for it, not like I did. I set my cane aside and ran my hand along the banister. The wood felt tired, but it still remembered me. In the living room, I sat in my old armchair, the one they'd shoved into the corner. Sunlight from the last of the day spilled through the window, warm against my face. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. The war was over. I'd won. And yet, winning isn't the same as joy. I thought of the Christmas mornings when their eyes lit up at the sight of the tree. I thought of birthdays, laughter, small hands tugging mine. Those memories were real, even if the people they grew into weren't. Loss doesn't vanish, even when revenge is complete. It lingers, cold at the edges of triumph. I sat there until the streetlights flickered on outside. The house creaked around me like an old friend stirring a wake. For the first time in months, I felt steady. That night, I opened the notebook one last time, wrote the final line, March 12th, "The house is mine again. The family is gone. Victory costs exactly what it weighs." I closed it, slid it into the drawer, and blew out the lamp. Outside, the yard was quiet, snowmelt dripping steady into the dark. I whispered into the silence, "Merry Christmas after all," and I didn't smile.